Theme 3 is, will we ever uncover deep metaphysical truth about reality? And perhaps we can turn this more into deep metaphysical truth about experience. And Patricia, I know earlier you said, that's not my question. My question is, how can I help with that pain? What does it mean to affect perhaps the brain so that the pain goes away? But I'd like to put some more pressure on you in relation to whether that also means that there is something there is something on the level of the being of that thing that you are examining, or whether you don't think so.
Well, obviously, some theories are better than other theories, and hypotheses get falsified all the time. And that's true not just of neuroscience, but it's true of science in general. And what precisely makes one theory better than the other? Now, here, Hilary would say that I have to talk very, very puritanically, and I mustn't say certain things like we're getting, by virtue of the theory being more predictive and explanatorily powerful, I mustn't say that we're getting closer to reality, so I won't say that. But we do know that there are differences in theories. And I mean, for example, with regard to panpsychism and the claim that protons and cow pies and fungus are conscious, it seems to me to be kind of outlandish. I mean, I don't care if people want to hold that, but there seems to be no evidence for it. There's nothing about a fungus that we know that shows that it's conscious under some conditions and not under others, and ditto for protons and ditto for cow pies. So some theories are better than other theories, and even those may crash and burn as yet more data come to the fore. But I think Hilary's being a bit prissy in insisting that we be precisely careful to never say that we're getting closer to an adequate model. Okay, all right, give it a rest. Let us, I say the sun sets, even though I know full well that the sun's not moving. And as a very, demanding semanticist, you might say, I cannot say that. Otherwise, I look like a dingbat. Well, okay, fine. But let's say that there is something about certain models that makes them more adequate than others. And if Hilary feels we'll never know what that is, fine, far be it for me to complain.
Okay, so it's very, very interesting, this, Patricia, because I think that in some ways we might have a similar response to panpsychism. So I share your feeling that it seems a bit outlandish to claim that all elements of nature have consciousness, and I take a sort of Occam's razor type response. This seems like a bit of a big move to make. So in the practice of this, I think that we might well share a lot in terms of which models we want to go with, But the reason why, and I also accept your criticism that in some sense I'm being unduly rigorous in saying, we really must be careful not to talk about ultimate truth. The reason I guess I'm encouraged to do that is because I think that it does have profound consequences referring to ultimate truth. I think it affects the way that we all interact with each other. We operate in a world in which an awfully large number of people in the world think they're right. They think that there is a way of thinking about things, and they're right and other people are wrong. And I think operating in a framework in which you give up this notion of an ultimate reality actually gets you into an exciting space where you have the potential to develop your models, or I would say closures of the world. You have the potential to make them more powerful, but you are not in the situation of thinking that there is one right answer, and you are open to alternative ways of thinking. But But I share with Patricia that there are some that I think, well, actually, that's a bit of a big move for me. I would, but Galen might be able to convince us, and that's why Patricia mentioned it, because Galen's a supporter of the panpsychist theory, as I understand it. He might say he's not, but he might be able to convince me, actually, it really will work, and you really can, and it's more powerful, and in which case, I would say, okay, I'll go with that, but that's the basis on which I would be operating.
Okay. Well, very briefly, I mean, first thing is that Occam's razor cuts the other way. Panpsychism is the most parsimonious theory, not an excessive or exaggerated one, because the only thing we absolutely know for certain is the existence of qualitative consciousness. So anyone who says it is, so we know that's one thing we absolutely know about reality. I'm afraid I have to say about ultimate reality. So anyone who thinks that it's not all like that is positing some other stuff, which is non-conscious stuff, with no evidence for its existence. There's zero evidence for it. I'm not saying that panpsychism is testable. It isn't. It's not a scientific theory. It's just, what it is technically, it's an inference to the best explanation. That is, what do we know for sure? What do we know for sure about reality? We know that there's consciousness. Now, do you really want to go on about this? I mean, so either it's there all the way down, or it's not. So let's suppose it's not. Let's suppose the stuff at the bottom is in no way non-conscious. Then you have to suppose that somehow consciousness emerges from this stuff that is in itself wholly and utterly non-conscious. You have to commit yourself to something called radical emergence. And that is a huge burden. That is a real no-no for any theory. So that's the sense in which panpsychism is a simple, more parsimonious, more elegant, simpler theory. And I can't claim to believe it. I don't know that it's true, but I just think it's clearly the most hard-nosed theory out there.
You mentioned the difference between science and philosophy, or different theories, and I'm wondering whether one way to bring out what you three agree on or disagree on is whether you think that philosophy is needed at all, or we could do everything with science when it comes to understanding what experience is or what pain is. Galen, would you like to go first?
I don't think, what do we need to understand? I know what pain is. I know what color experience is.
You mean from a first person?
Yeah, but that's the only way you ever have direct access to it anyway. I don't think there's any problem of understanding. The problem only arises when you think of the physical stuff as being completely different and wonder how you get the consciousness from the stuff that's completely different. So and that's precisely what a panpsychist doesn't do.
Does that mean then that you would be okay with philosophy kind of taking a backseat and science?
Well, there are some distinctive, there are two, free will is we're going to talk about that later. That is a very clear example of a purely a priori topic, which is can be science has nothing to say to it, and philosophy gives a very clear answer to it. So that's one such topic. Yeah.
Patricia, what are your thoughts about whether there is a need for philosophy, or whether you would be happy for science to replace philosophy?
Well, it kind of depends on the philosopher. I mean, there are philosophers who are doing really interesting work. So
Do these philosophers look like scientists?
No, I mean, and you mischaracterized my position by saying that I thought only logic and analysis would give you adequate concepts in the future. That's just not something that I thought of. But the fact is, of course, that speculation is very useful in science, in all sciences. And people speculate in order to put together a hypothesis that they might go on to test. And although Galen thinks he knows everything there is to know about consciousness because he has it, he doesn't always have it. He doesn't have it when he's in deep sleep. Aren't you curious about what's going on when you're in deep sleep?
Yeah, I am.
Have you ever had Have you ever had an anesthetic?
Yep.
Have you ever even had a tooth pulled where you had a local anesthetic? Aren't you interested in what happens?
Yeah. Well,
now, it's okay not to be curious about the natural world. I understand that. And there are many things that you like to do other than think about causality and think about what what causes certain kinds of changes in consciousness. But I happen to be interested in those things. And that doesn't mean that you know, there's some that I have some sort of failure of personhood, because not every metaphysical crackpot that comes down the pike is interesting to me.
Hilary, I feel you want to say something in response.
Yeah. So on this question about science, you know, I'm all in favor of the principles of observation, empirical observation and reason, as I said at the outset, and I'd want us to employ those and look at our models. But I don't think that science has somehow stumbled upon the only way of discovering better ways of intervening in the world, or indeed that it's ever, as I was saying, going to arrive at a correct one. So in the conversation that's going on here, I think the idea that, we're getting either to the bottom of consciousness, or that we can have experiments which will define the answers. I think we've got many, many different ways of talking about consciousness. If we look at the way that different cultures across history have talked about consciousness, they would have had countless different sorts of story. And the sorts of story that we operate are very valuable in some areas. So our greater understanding of brain processes and how that might lead to consciousness may help us deal with certain conditions and so forth. But there are lots of other ways of holding the world which are powerful in their own right and will enable us to do things that the framework of contemporary science perhaps doesn't enable us to do. And
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.